Definitely feels like a Rocco's Modern Life kind of day. Anyhow, this has been a very interesting week for mental health. For my own, you know, does anyone else find vacations extremely stressful and kind of mind bending? I don't know what it is. Traveling itself is something that just absolutely ninja kicks me in the face every single time I do it. I always just end up like, it's rough. And then I end up at work and I'm like, finally, I can relax. I'm never going to understand that. It's the weirdest thing. Overall, doing pretty good. But honestly, I don't want to waste too much time on myself in this one. So we have these quote unquote Karens. And everybody and their mom knows what these Karens are right now. These are basically people who are freaking out in public due to some type of entitlement issue. Typically, they're female, although there are male equivalents. I think sometimes they're called Jims or Kevins. And in a lot of ways, that name has become a bit of a slur. But the phenomenon of the Karen has not gone unnoticed by me for a variety of issues. What I want to talk about today is the concept of faking crazy. And I think that this is actually kind of a nice cross section into what happened this week. But before I get into the viral video du jour of the Victoria's Secret Karen, let me explain why this subject actually means a lot to me. And I have I have some stories to tell, and I have one specifically that I thought was absolutely fascinating. By now, you guys know I wrote a memoir. And that memoir, which I'll link below, cha-ching. That memoir was about my time in a psychiatric hospital. One of the defining moments, and I actually haven't finished writing the sequel to it yet. There is another one coming. But one of the defining moments of my time in the psychiatric hospital was a encounter I had with a woman. Goodness gracious, she may have been named Karen. Obviously, I have to go back and fictionalize the names. There's no way you'd ever be able to figure out who these people are. But in any case, this woman comes into the psychiatric center and she is telling everyone, I'm not really crazy, right? I'm not really crazy. I'm not really mentally ill. I just need a break from my life, right? Now, for all of us, certified crazy people, we all kind of take offense to this because we're like, you faked your way in here because you needed a break from your life. Well, you're going to be in for a pretty nasty wake-up call because this place ain't to break. But two, it was very strange because for most of us in the psychiatric hospital, we had gotten to a point where we all knew we had problems, right? And most of the time, therapy really was just trying to get us to figure out what our problem actually was. But here comes this woman, and she is just outright just saying, I'm not really crazy. I literally just faked it so I could get away from my husband, who at the time was struggling with what was very likely to be terminal cancer, right? Now, the orderlies, which I have nothing but positive stuff to say about the techs or the orderlies at my psychiatric hospital. I've noticed recently that every time you see orderlies, I'm using a lot of air quotes today. I'm very much doing my Joey Tribbiani. Every time you see them depicted in pop culture, they are never depicted well. Whether you're looking at One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, there's a recent comic that I purchased, a Harley Quinn comic, where orderlies are practically villains. But the people who worked in my psychiatric hospital they were really, really good. I had nothing but positive experiences with them. And there were times when they had to get pretty forceful with the patients. But that never really happened with me. I was luckily never, ever violent in my experience of, my struggles with mental health. But they watched her like a hawk. There was always someone in the room with her, watching her very, very carefully. And at the time I noticed this, and for a lot of us who were, very much participating in the therapy and were, really, really present in our treatment, I remember asking one of them, I was like, why are you guys so concerned about her? She's just straight up admitted that she faked her illness to get in here. And the orderly was like, you can't trust that. And he said, the people who claim to be faking it when they get here are the ones who are in for the most serious breakdown. He's like, something's going to happen and she's going to fall apart, and we need to be there when it hits her, because when it hits her, it's going to be rough. Right? So they were watching her, because people who say that tend to have the most extreme interactions. That was a really big moment for me. I was like, wow, that's really, really interesting. That for the text there was no such thing as faking mental illness. You just have not actually gotten to the point where you're aware of it yet. Now, for a long time, as I've been talking about my own struggles and my experiences, one of the things I constantly tell people, because I hear about this a lot, we talk about people being crazy all the time. We talk about people being sociopaths. People will call each other a sociopath just because they're angry at each other, right? I've been called a sociopath. And I'm like, I am not sociopathic. I feel emotions extremely strongly to the point that I'm like, right? We usually throw around phrases like that because we're angry at each other. But I have heard people accuse others of faking mental illness to avoid responsibility. That is a very interesting accusation in a lot of different ways, because what I tell people is, from my experience, there really is no such thing as faking mental illness. Even if you admit to faking mental illness, congratulations, you probably need therapy, right? That is such an extreme thing to do, that the fact that you feel you cannot control your environment, that you need to feign problems in your brain, you've already crossed a line that you already need therapy, because you're doing that to yourself. So I've always said that if someone is feigning mental illness, congratulations, you're mentally ill. Now, the reason I brought this up with this Karen, quote unquote, is the video might actually be a example of a true faking of mental illness, which is fascinating. Now, for those of you guys who haven't seen the video, it begins with violence as she slaps this woman who's recording her, right? And the woman who's recording her reacts, and there is a lot of racial dynamics that are going on here. And the woman who used violence immediately breaks down and starts crying and screaming and having what legitimately looks like a mental breakdown. It really fits a lot of the criteria for a mental breakdown. But the problem with this is that she's going through the motions of this mental breakdown, right? Is she really having a mental breakdown? Or is she trying to escape the almost inevitable backlash that's going to occur when the video of her actions is posted, right? And so she falls to the ground. She very clearly, well, in my opinion, she clearly pretends to faint. When she faints, she falls over. A few minutes later, she comes to, and starts screaming and pointing at the woman. She's recording me. There is a playing the victim aspect here. And when I saw this, I was like, oh my, that might be an actual instance where someone's faking mental illness. Now, again, what I'm going to say here, I think, is quite controversial. I'm going to say it anyway, because I'm not too terribly afraid of controversy, as long as I'm willing to take responsibility for the controversy, right? Discussion is extremely important for me. I'm still going to say that this woman needs mental help, right? I'm still going to say that this woman has issues that she needs to get resolved. And I'm going to defer to that point that I made about, well, if she's resorting to this, she's already in a situation where she's extremely bad at handling her own problems and controlling her life, right? So now there is a very interesting kind of sort of cross section that we get here. Like, where does your mental health begin and where does your responsibility end? That's a tough question, right? At what point am I no longer responsible for my actions because I'm sick? That's tough, man. That's tough because I'm not, even though I'm willing to say that this person probably does have things that they need therapy to address, I'm not willing to go so far as to say that they are not responsible for their actions. And here's why. What this person did when they started trying to play off a panic attack or a breakdown in Victoria's Secret, what this did was actually extremely dangerous for the person that they were trying to put the panic attack on. When they actually responded with violence to a woman in a store, and the woman actually says, and this is something that we really need to listen to. The cops come, people are walking by, and none of them really respond too terribly negatively to this woman's behavior, the one who is having the, again, quote unquote, mental breakdown. But imagine if the roles had been reversed. If the roles had been reversed and we had an African-American woman having a mental breakdown in the middle of the mall who instigated and used violence in any capacity. And again, the violence that the woman used appears to only be a slap. Only a slap is enough to cause major, major problems for someone. If the roles had been reversed, her life, I mean, that could have escalated extremely quickly. Whereas everybody in the video is trying to treat this woman with kid gloves. And they're trying to diffuse the situation, trying to get the woman with the phone to walk away. And the whole time I'm like, you're protecting her. Would you have protected her if the roles had been reversed? If it had been an African-American woman having this issue? Would we have reached out with the compassion to say, oh, she has a mental health problem? I'm not so sure, right? And, this is one of those things that's, a little bit sensitive. I'm not the type of person who should be an authority on this. I'm a privileged white guy, right? I'm up here talking about my mental health problems and airing it out for the world. For the most part, that does not blow back on me very much. I think that African Americans have different rules to go by. And this is an absolutely grand example of that. And it's not right. Now, the weird complication I would introduce into this discussion is this. We extend this woman, the understanding that we have that this could be a mental problem. We need to stop and think about the fact that if those roles were reversed, we should react the same way, right? We all need to reevaluate our behavior. And we all need to think about how we would react if we were seeing something that was completely the opposite. So even though I'm going to come down pretty hard and say, it's pretty obvious that woman was faking crazy, right? She was faking crazy to try to dodge obvious consequences that were about to come down on her, and they're going to come down hard. She's still not going to escape it. Even though she's faking crazy, she's still crazy. And she still needs help, regardless of what the justice system, decides to do in this situation. But again, if the roles were reversed, I would say the same thing. And we all have to really think about that. Now, back to the central issue here to get away from the Karens. I had a story recently that also came to me through a private channel. I want to share this with you because this was fascinating. And I think this could help people in a completely different area of mental health. And so what this person told me was they were involved in a situation, and I don't want to put any organizations on blast because that's not going to help anybody. But this person was involved with a certain, religious organization. And we all know there are religious organizations out there. When you get involved with them, they can be very difficult to leave, And we know that there are some words that we would use for those organizations, right? A big C word. It begins with C and rhymes with old, right? But again, what happened was this person was in this extreme religious institution. They had ways of tracking them. They had debt that was owed to them. There were a lot of very complicated issues that prevented this person from leaving this organization. Now, this is a horrendous problem, right? Like how do you get away from something like that? How do you remove yourself from that, that equation, especially when there are loved ones involved, especially when there's family and your actions could blow back on them? Like, this is serious stuff. And this is something that happens, a lot. And this person, their solution to that problem was to act crazy, was to act mentally ill, to the point that the organization that they belonged to released them to the care of mental health professionals that allowed them to leave the organization in a way that did not immediately blow back, right? Their mental illness is what caused them to be able to remove themselves from the situation. That's really interesting, right? I'd never thought about that before either. That in this case, faking mental illness or faking crazy essentially worked for them in order to get out of the situation. Now, here's the problem, and here's my response to this. And again, as I'm speaking through this video, if there's something that I say that you think is just straight up outright wrong, please tell me in the comments. I've developed a little bit thicker skin over the past few years. I'm an English teacher. I pretty much get hate all the time, which is okay. It's kind of my lot in life at this point. That's not why I went in the mental hospital. And maybe someday I'll explain what circumstances led up to my hospitalization. That would be a good video, actually. In any case, let me get back to the point. I would still say that in that instance, as they are faking crazy in order to diffuse the situation and escape it, my opinion on this matter is that you still probably need therapy after that, right? For the simple matter of the fact is, in order to escape a situation like that, you had to basically almost self-harm in a lot of ways in order to pretend that you had lost your faculties. That is already an area of trauma. You have endured and you have put up with and experienced trauma because you are you have experienced loss of control of your own environment, that in order to gain control back, you have to pretend to lose your mental faculties. I don't think there's any way you get out of a situation like that without having to talk to a therapist and actually make sure you haven't picked up some habits and thought patterns that are going to come back and get you later. So again, I feel like in this case, faking crazy to solve a problem. And again, that's not judging. For me, that's a survival mechanism that when things are that far gone, you have to do what you have to do. And what I'm saying is, it kind of makes me think of like a Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, where in order to survive a hostage situation, you develop an affinity for your captor, right? And that's a survival mechanism. And I'd be shocked if after that you don't pick up some PTSD. You're already dealing with trauma, and anytime trauma is involved, you need to at least sit down with someone. So again, this isn't a judgment at all. If anything, the only thing I feel like I'm actually really trying to say about this issue is, if you fake crazy, even if it's for a rational reason, you still need to go talk to someone. You're in a situation where you have probably endured trauma, right? So this one's kind of gone around in circles a little bit. It's been fun to actually kind of think about how this could apply to Karens in the wild who use the appearance of mental illness in order to kind of like gain control of a situation they've lost control of. And I think, honestly, the way I want to end this one there's still a lot of work that has to be done when we think about the boundary between responsibility and mental illness, right? We have legal constructs that if someone has completely lost touch with reality, that they are not necessarily like hit with the full consequences of their crimes. They still get hit with consequences. You know, if I'm a person who's completely lost my mental faculties and I go out and I, shoot someone, or I'm violent, or I do something horrible, at the very least, society, the legal system has a responsibility to try to protect society from us. But in that case, we're not necessarily treating them like prisoners incarcerated. We're treating them like individuals who actually have a mental problem, right? So the consequences of the actions change depending upon whether or not you're really responsible for what you've done. But in actuality, the consequences are not measured by your craziness. It's measured by the rightness or the wrongness or the legal implications that you are aware of when you commit the action. So even if you are pretty outright, acting crazy, if you understand the illegal nature of what you're doing, you can still get saddled with a lot of the full consequences of your actions. I'm not saying that's the wrong way to approach it, because, if you're dangerous, we have to protect society from you, right? So in any case, this has been a fun one. Like, this is one I might return to, especially if I get more stories of faking crazy. This is something that I'm always going to be really interested in, because I got to tell you, and I just realized I didn't finish out that yarn I spun earlier. The woman who came into the psychiatric center, who claimed to have been faking crazy, yeah, she flippin' lost it. She 1,000-yard stare, not able to make any sense out of the words that were coming out of her mouth. She went catatonic. Of all the people that I knew there, whether they were abusing alcohol, whether they were withdrawing from Xanax, maybe whether they were cycling really bad bipolar depression, they were lost on schizophrenia, no one experienced it the way that she did. Like, she was gone. And in that case, the orderlies, they were 100% right about her. She comes in, she claims to be faking crazy, and eventually it was almost like her brain just fell right apart. It was scary. It's something I'm never, ever going to forget. The look in her eyes and the way that she spoke that made no sense. She was word salading everywhere. And it was like there was nothing there. She just broke, just shattered like glass. I think I've been delaying writing the second part of my memoir. And I think I realized, because dealing with her is going to be extremely difficult. Like, dealing with depicting and giving her justice. I did get a publication with a story about her in the Hitchlit Review. So if you want a preview of what it might look like, check out the Hitchlit Review. I think it's free. I don't remember. But I think it was actually an essay, too, on this very topic. I think it might have been actually called Faking Crazy. I'll see if I can find it so that I can link it below the video if you'd like to see it. So in any case, I'm going to leave this. This is an open-ended video, just like they all are. But if you have stories of faking crazy, if you have stories of situations where someone was pretending to be mentally ill or doing it for any type of reason, please let me share those with me, because this is something that's always going to be absolutely fascinating for me. In any case, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm excited about it. Maybe one day I'll record a session. Well, if I ever get better equipment. Y'all have a lovely weekend. Thank you.